Hey everyone, Viv here. In case you missed it, I wanted to let you know that we have a fortnightly email newsletter. We give you the latest recap on all things happening in our community. In there, you'll also be the first to know about our next events, merch drops, and exciting announcements. Head on over to levelasianpodcast.com/newsletter to sign up for the latest. Now, on to the episode.
Wagga Wagga was the school of life for me because I did zero study, went to no classes, did nothing. I just learned about people and weed. Pharmacies back then were so busy, and for me to come in and ask them if I can teach them about cannabis, but I can see the stress in their eyes because they've got patients waiting for them.
In this episode of the Level Asian podcast, we're joined by Lisa Nguyen, founder of Astrid, Australia's multi-award-winning first female-led dispensary and specialty clinic for cannabinoid medicines, plant therapies, and nutraceuticals. Lisa shares her unique uni experience in Wagga Wagga and how it changed her perspective on life values, and how she then transitioned into her first cannabis sales role in Australia. Lisa also talks to us about how she built Astrid during the middle of a pandemic, the key challenges she faced along the way, and why she encourages her team to embrace failures. Enjoy the episode. Before we get started on today's episode, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this podcast is recorded, the land of the Darug people. We would like to acknowledge and pay respects to our elders past and present and the next generation coming through. Now, on to today's episode.
All right. Well, Lisa, thanks for coming up from Melbourne, actually.
No worries. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, no, and I remember, actually, I'm trying to remember how we connected. It was like on, can you remember? Yeah, I was going to say LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And I remember what it is. Someone sent me an article featuring you with Astrid. Right. And going, one of the first, or if not the first, you can correct me if I'm wrong, like medicinal cannabis dispensaries, right? Yeah. And I was like, this is hella cool, but at the same time, also being Asian Australian as well, right? So I think I reached out to you, and then we hit it off on LinkedIn, and then we jumped on a call. Yeah. And like you had like the funniest story about how this all like led to it, right? Yeah. So I really want to get into it, but I think before we get into it, we always start with childhood, what it was like growing up. So do you want to sort of start there and then tell us what that was like going through high school and primary school? Cool.
So I grew up, obviously I was born and raised in Melbourne, Australia. And so my parents are both Vietnamese. And so they came here during the Vietnam War. And they both came on boats as well. So they both were in refugee camps, etc. But they met here at a party. So like in Melbourne, or I think it was maybe early 80s. Mm-hmm. They came and everyone kind of stayed within like these like commission huts, like houses kind of thing. And my parents like met at a party.
Wow. Pretty cool. Yeah.
I know, pretty cool. And my mom, and this says a lot about my parents, because I think that childhood does play a big role in shaping you, as you grow into your adolescence, particularly our generation. But my dad at the time had a girlfriend.
Oh, he's a player.
Yeah. And my mom met my dad and she's like, I want him. So she just went for it. And like, long story short, they got together and then like very quickly afterwards, got married and very quickly afterwards got pregnant with me. Wow. So I like to say that I was born out of love.
Literally.
I'm the eldest, so and I've got a brother and a sister, but because I'm firstborn, I'm definitely born out of love.
Yeah. Wait, so what are they born out of then?
Necessity.
Finances. Oh shit. Okay, yep. And then you grew up obviously in Melbourne.
I grew up in Melbourne. Like? So my parents were really poor. Coming to Australia, they came with nothing. So my dad is from Dalat, which is like a mountainous town in Vietnam, and my mum is from a coastal beach town in Vietnam. And so they're like extreme opposites. Yeah. And it's funny because now my husband and I are also extreme opposites. It's funny how that works. But so coming into Australia, they escaped with nothing, and their stories escaping to Australia was also quite significant as well. And I think it also speaks a lot about the type of people that they are. But essentially, like they came here with nothing, and then my mum is very tenacious. Like she's the type of woman that my grandpa didn't allow her to come to Australia because he's very what's the word when you're very, very loyal to your country?
Patriotic.
Yeah, right. Yes, he's very patriotic.
So it's like a betrayal if she left.
Yeah, and she was, I think, quite young at the time. I think 16, 17, something like that. And it was a betrayal to my grandpa for her leaving the country. And there was one boat, and my uncle, who's older than her, was had permission to go on the boat because he was a bit older. But my mum, behind my grandpa's back, she went with my uncle.
Holy crap.
She went with him. And I think I remember my grandma at the time. My grandma is the breadwinner of the family.
Yep.
And it's a trend in my family. All the women are
power women.
Power women.
We love that.
And she basically shoved all this gold in my mum in random places in her body.
What do you mean? Like just Gringotts of gold?
Yeah.
Like bullions of gold?
My grandma was like one of those women who she worked a lot, and my grandpa was really, really creative.
Yep.
And so he would he did calligraphy and all this kind of stuff. And my grandma would be in the rice paddies every day, just hustling, And so she had hidden all this gold in the house, in the random places in the house. And so when my mum told my grandma that she wanted to go, she's like, yep, cool. You need to make a life for yourself. I'm going to give you gold. So she went and got the gold, gave it to my mum. My mum ran to the boat and then got to the boat with my uncle, but then she fell into the water because she was so little, and so my uncle had to carry her out and put her onto the boat, and then they went to the Philippines refugee camp there.
What happened to the gold?
Oh, it's still in her body.
Okay. I was going to say she did it fall out?
No.
So she kept that. Okay.
Yeah, but they had to hide it quite discreetly because otherwise there's pirates and stuff that would come, and so it was a scary time escaping Vietnam to Australia because there's a lot of risk and there's a lot of unknown, and you just had to make it happen.
Yeah.
Because you want to have a better life for yourself. But my mum was one of those people, and she still is now, one of those very optimistic people who just thinks anything in life is possible. She went to this refugee camp and told everyone she was a nurse. And I'm like, you don't have a nursing degree.
Fake it till you make it.
She's also a lawyer, apparently, She's just one of those people who just she's fake it till you make it. One of those people. And I think I have a lot of that in me because of my mum. And I have a lot of my dad in me. My dad is very chill. He's a chiller. He just is, he's very happy, just the happiest guy I know. He's just really happy. Whereas my mum's always been the very gotta work hard, gotta study, gotta hustle kind of thing, and gotta make things happen kind of thing. She's the businesswoman. And my parents growing up, coming to Australia, meeting here, getting married, etc., they had nothing but then worked really, really hard. And so they they had a sweatshop. So before they had a sweatshop, they were just sewing for other people, contract work kind of thing. And then eventually they sewed day and night, all day and night. And eventually they got really, really busy and really successful, and so they had their own business. But my mum ran that business. My dad cut all the materials. And growing up, my brother, my sister, and I would work after school and on the weekends, and on the school holidays. I remember hating school holidays because all of my white friends would play, and I'm like, what is play? When I go home, I have to work.
Literally, yeah.
Literally, I'll have to thread the string through the hoodie or do the buttons. And one time my parents had a factory in Springvale, which is the Asian suburb of Melbourne. And I remember this one time, and I remember this really clearly. We were working there on the weekend, and my brother was at this machine where you would it had these two things, and you put the button in, and then you press the foot, and the things goes like this,
right?
And the button would then stick to the jacket,
right?
And his finger went in.
As he got his finger jammed in it.
His thumb went half in.
Oh shit!
And he started bleeding everywhere, but he was underage, and
there's no OH&S at this time.
There's no OH&S. What is that? I don't know what that is. My parents were when the ambulance come, just tell them that you were playing. Oh my God. And I was like, okay. And so I was briefing my brother, and he was really chill and calm. He's like, yeah, it hurts, but it's fine. So yeah, that was my childhood.
Yep. And then you've got a lot of stories. I remember when we did prep calls with you about your mum, and I think we'll get into that a little bit, sort of leading up to you setting up Astrid, because there was other entrepreneurial stuff that you were doing, right? Yeah. So, but before we do that, school obviously being another big component. What was that like?
Oh, school in the 90s and the 2000s was in Australia was hard. I reckon. Yeah, was it hard for you guys?
Yeah, I think I found it tough. I mean, I went to a mainly Asian school, so not so much from there, but I just never felt that I necessarily fit into the school curriculum. I wasn't an academic type, and I know you sort of mentioned that a little bit, where studies was not a huge thing for you. So
it was hard. Yeah, I think that so I went to primary school. I went to a school, and I think I was one of the first Asians there. So then immediately I was already confused. I was like, I went home one day. I was like, Mum, I don't have blonde hair. And she's like, of course, because you're Asian. And she's like, I was like, can you pack me sandwiches, because all my friends are like, laughing at me with my stinky tit core and stuff. And she's like, no, you're gonna have your tit core. And I was like, okay.
You're a proud Vietnamese woman.
Yeah. And it took me a little while to really understand what that meant and how I fit in. And eventually there was more Asians, and then I kind of understood, and there was more one of my friends in school was a Mexican, and it's very similar kind of background. So we kind of, hung out with each other because of that. But and I think growing up, I had a brother and a sister. And I was always the eldest and the most hardworking person. Like I worked really hard, but not very smart. My grades were average, but I tried really hard. And my mum would be really, really frustrated because she would put me into every single math, science, whatever tutoring there was, but I'd still get B's. And she's like, you're not trying hard enough. But I'm like, I'm trying so hard. I'm trying really hard. I've got notes in the back of the toilet. I'm like studying on the way to school. I'm studying after school. And I tried really, really hard, and I was frustrated with myself for not being good enough. And the thing is, I was really good at English though. And I never studied for English. And I was really good at writing. I was really good at literature. I loved history. And I was confused about that. But I knew that I was good at it because I never tried. But I enjoyed it. But what is enjoyment when you're Asian? When you're young?
If you're not working, you're not
no.
That is true.
Yeah. So I would come home and Mum would like, your math scores are like B pluses, and but your English scores are A pluses. So clearly you're trying more in English than math. And I'm like, I promise you.
Oh, that was the conclusion she made.
Yeah. And I'm like, I promise you, I'm trying equally for both. And I think it's just that kind of mentality where Asian parents don't understand different children or different kids growing up in Australia may have different skill sets.
Right.
It's just what they know. They know my mum growing up, there's no such thing as what you like or what you're good at. It's just be excellent at school, and that was it. That's all they knew. And I think in hindsight, it is a lot of that kind of coming into a new country, it's survivor tactics, because that's all they know, right? And they've escaped their country, they've come here for a better life, and of course all the hopes and dreams are in me. And so therefore all they can really teach me is what they know.
Right.
So and that took me a long time to really understand and really come to terms with as well. And I think in my later years, I spent a lot of my 20s really trying to unpack all the trauma that was associated with my childhood. And also I spent some time really understanding what that means for me in my future, but also spending the time to forgive my parents as well.
Yep.
And I think that really helped me with my growth as an adult, being able to really let that past go and then move forward. And I think it's a really important thing that, all Asian Australian, Asian American people should be doing.
Yeah, well, I mean, the question, and you probably already answered it, was really did you have a lot of resentment towards, say, your parents or your mum during school?
Yeah.
Because she sort of essentially forced herself on you, right?
Yeah.
Because you got a story about even uni and trying to get into uni. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah. So prior to the forgiveness, there was a lot of tribulation. I think that I was always the rebellious one because I was never smart enough, I was never good enough. And so when I was in year 12, my mum wanted me to be a doctor or a dentist.
Of course.
Or whatever the Asian 5 was at that time. And I, of course, was like, I don't think this is the right career for me because I'm not very good at those subjects, so I don't think that I'd be a very good professional at it later on. And she was like, what are you talking about? It's just because you're not trying hard enough. It's what all people should be doing because that's what success means. And would fight about it a lot. And because I was the eldest out of 20 or so cousins at the time as well. And so I was the one that kind of I was the second eldest actually, but I had to kind of break that kind of mold almost.
Yep.
And so in year 12, you had to pick your subjects. And so I wanted to pick English and literature and history, and I'm like, I want to be a writer. Maybe
social science girl.
Yeah, I'm like, I want to do art, and I want to do maybe have my own business and do PR and marketing and writing and that kind of thing. And when I pitched that to my mum, she was like, what does that mean? How will you make money? What will I call you? Are you a doctor? Are you a pharmacist? What's the title? I'm like, there's no title.
Yeah, right.
She's like, you're not doing that. And I'm like, oh. And so I was really, really frustrated. And so she essentially forced me to do the Asian 5 subjects. And of course, I didn't do as well as she wanted me to do. Although I think in normal people's terms, it was a good score. So I got, my enter score was 92 or 93 or something like
solid,
that. Yeah, which is for normal people.
I didn't get that.
Yeah. I also went to the most competitive high school in Melbourne. So I went to MacRob, and it's like a selector high school. You have to sit an exam to get in. And of course, because I was such an obedient kind of child when I was year 9, I tried really hard because I wanted to get their approval. And a lot of my childhood was getting my parents' approval. I'm in reflection.
Right.
And so I tried really hard. I actually got in second round to MacRob. But when I went to MacRob, I always felt like I didn't fit in because everyone there was freaking brilliant.
Studious students.
Oh, they were studious, but also naturally smart,
Right.
because they had to be the top 3% of their school to get in. So you can imagine the amount of people. I knew that the people at this school were going to change the world because they're on another level. Like the girls at this school would wag school. So they'll go to the library and teach each other because they were smarter than teachers.
Because it was more effective, or
they were smarter than the teachers. The teachers were they couldn't keep up with the students. They were so smart. It was so competitive, so insane, but it's such an amazing kind of environment to be in. But I never fit in because I couldn't keep up with these girls, right? And it just added to my complex of never being good enough.
Yeah. Right.
And so, I did the Asian 5 at this school, got 92, went home from school that day that I got my results, told my mum, and she cried, not out of happiness, but out of disappointment.
Far out.
That's going to hurt.
How'd you react?
Yeah. I cried for a week because when you're in year 12, all you want is, I know you deny it, but all you want is your parents to be proud of you.
Yes.
And my dad was very proud of me because, he's a chiller. And he's like, oh, yeah, you tried really hard. Yeah, that's really, really good. Well done. Whereas my mum was ashamed to tell relatives. We had this... the enter score came in a little award, the A4 document thing, and she turned it around.
Oh, that's really hard to deal with.
Really hard, yeah. And the thing is, I tried really hard, and I think it was hard for her because she really wanted me to be a doctor or a pharmacist. But my mum is a tenacious lady. She's very determined, and so what happened was I actually got into commerce arts at Melbourne University. I was ecstatic.
You wanted to do it?
I wanted to do it because I'm like, I could do commerce, maybe I can do business, but I can do arts, I can do writing. 2 things I really liked. And it's like Melbourne University, it can be with all my friends. It's going to be awesome. Went to orientation day, came back. My mum came running down the driveway, and I remember this very distinctly, running down the driveway with an envelope in her hand and waving it around. And then she's like, I'm so happy. I'm so proud of you. And I'm like, what happened? She's like, you got into pharmacy school. And I'm like, the fuck? I didn't apply for pharmacy school.
Yep.
And she's like, I applied.
So she applied on your behalf?
So she applied.
Behind your back.
My tenacious, wonderful mother to every single state except for Victoria because she had gone and made usernames and passwords somehow for every other state.
Holy
and
shit.
so I had gone to 3 different pharmacy schools without me knowing.
Wow.
That's such a tiger mum thing to do.
Such a tiger mum. Even now she's a very tenacious lady.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a few directions we can go here. so maybe, the uni was Charles Sturt, wasn't it?
Yeah, so the uni that I got to, so I got into Charles Sturt University, Wagga Wagga, and I was like, Mum, where the hell's Wagga Wagga? She's like, oh, it's close enough for me to drive to see you. And I'm like,
it's like
where is it?
5-hour
so
drive
Wagga
from
Wagga,
Melbourne.
just for context, is halfway between Sydney and Melbourne. So it's literally past Albury, right? So it's like 4.5-hour drive. And so I was like, I'm not going. She's like, what are you going to do? Like, you're 17, you have no money, no savings. Like, what are you going to do? I'm like, oh, shit, she's right.
So she strong-armed you, basically.
Yeah. So she put me into a car, drove me to Wagga Wagga, shoved me there. Anyway, so I went to Wagga Wagga, and for the first time in my life, I didn't want to study. I didn't want to try. I'm like, I've been trying and been studying my whole life, and it's got me here. What's the point? Mm-hmm. So the first day of Wagga Wagga Pharmacy School orientation, I went there and I had a dilemma. I saw everyone there. I had the choice of hang out with the Asians or hang out with the Wogs. So I chose the Wogs. Because I knew
why?
Because the Asians would study all day, and I've done that.
You having allergic reaction?
I went to Macrob. I don't want to have another 4 years of Macrob. So I decided to hang out with the Wogs, and it was, in hindsight, one of the best life decisions I've ever made. And it's funny how in life you have those sliding doors moments where you think, well, if I didn't choose that, then how would my life be? Yep. And for me, that was that moment. If I didn't choose to hang out with the Wogs, then I wouldn't have learned about life. Like I still think that Wagga Wagga was the school of life for me because I did zero study, went to no classes, did nothing. I just learned about people and weed. That's all I did. So I really didn't want to study at all, and I did the bare minimum. And then literally all day we'd just hang out with each other, and then would ask each other questions about life. What do you want to do in life? Like, well, what's your religion? Like, what's the purpose of this place that we're in right now? And
How interesting.
Yeah, it was 4 years of bliss. And I had that inkling at the back of my head all the time going, oh, but what am I going to do after this? But because you're surrounded by such wonderful people who are so curious about life and really push you to question why you're here, why you're doing this, and just enjoy the moment. And so often in life, even now, it's so fast paced, right? We always talk about like things like burnout and like, you know, living for the future and all that kind of stuff. But in those 4 years in Wagga Wagga, I can honestly say that we lived in the moment for 4 years.
Oh, that's so nice to hear.
Wow. Yeah, and it really helped to ground me. Yep. And a lot of people say, well, how are you so mature? Or how do you have such a different perspective in life? And I think it's because I learnt about life very early on.
Do you think it's because everyone had to congregate to Wagga where most people didn't live in Wagga?
Yeah.
And they were like, well, I'm not at home.
Yeah.
I'm just surrounded by people who are same age as me, probably same aspirations. And you just, what else could you do?
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly, yeah.
So what was it? I mean, can you share some examples? I mean, you just did obviously with some of the questions you guys would ask each other, but like what helped you learn more about life, I guess, in general?
Yeah. I think I started a book called A Dream Book.
Okay.
And so all my friends in Melbourne thought I was crazy, whereas all my friends in Wagga thought I was normal. And so the Dream Book was just questions I had about life. And I'm like, but things don't make sense. Like, why is this religion like this? And why is this religion like this? And a lot of my friends were from like a Coptic background. A lot of my friends are also from a Muslim background. Some are from a Christian background. And I found it really interesting learning about different religions, learning about politics, learning about like the purpose of us human beings being here. What is the point of living, really? And one of my friends, Z, he's a spoken word poet. And when I first met him, I was like, what the hell is a spoken word poet?
Well, what is it? I don't know what it is. Do you?
Can you please like just put his link here?
Show notes.
Continue.
Yeah.
So a spoken word poet is a poet who stands up and does stand-up poetry.
Right.
But in a way that's quite meaningful, and it's like storytelling, but in poetry. And he's won Australian Poetry Slam gigs a couple of times, win University as well. And now that's his career. He's a life coach and a spoken word poet.
Wow.
And he's one of my really good friends. I think back then he didn't know that's what he wanted to do in life because he was studying IT, but he was really good at it. And he really changed people's lives by doing poetry. And the poetry was sometimes political because he's Pakistani.
Yep.
Sometimes inspirational. Sometimes just about normal day life. But he's freaking awesome. And just like people like that who are really curious and question life. And I wrote everything down in my little dream book. Here are more questions about life. Here are all my things I want to know more things about. How do I connect all the dots? And I'll bring this book back to Melbourne, and all my Melbourne friends were like, Lisa, you're really overthinking things. Like, just get a boyfriend. And I'm like, I don't have time for a boyfriend. I have to solve these questions in life.
What is the meaning of life?
Yeah. And so it's just like, you know, I'm lucky in that I was exposed to like a diverse amount of people really early on in life. And I really found myself and found time for myself in my 20s instead of chasing the next thing. A lot of people who kind of like do university in Melbourne, they're like, you go to university, you go to classes, you have to get a boyfriend, you go to like the Asian clubs, and you hang around the same circle all the time. And so it's really hard to kind of like break that kind of mindset if you're only around the same people. Whereas I always love surrounding myself with different people, even if I disagree with them, because I learned so much things. Even beyond my university crew, I had a group of people who always inspired me, like mentors and things like that. And I'd make time with them in my life, in my early 20s, because I wanted to learn about their experiences and how they got to where they are, and what else I could do to learn from them.
It's like Wagga gave you a taste of being removed from Melbourne and being able to actually see a different perspective compared to academics. Like I think hearing your story is making me feel like, wow, I went through something very similar. I grew up in Wagga, so I was born and raised in... Yeah. My mum went to Charles Sturt University.
What?
Yeah, so my parents plucked me out of Wagga to bring all of us to Sydney because the education there, it was all partying weed, like that kind of stuff, right? But I went through the same situation where it was like all academics, being the oldest daughter, you always want to do better, because that's all you know and that you have no other comparison to it. It wasn't until I actually moved to a public school here, because I was supposed to go to a selective school here when we moved to Sydney, one of the top ones as well. But I moved to a public school, and the public school had a very diverse set of people, like different cultures, not just Asians, not just Caucasians. And I think that if I hadn't gone there, I don't think I would have gotten a taste of what a different perspective was like. But I'm also curious to know, this is taking a different tangent, but you went from Wagga, where you were thinking about life, but then where did you take yourself after university?
Yeah, I think that was a different trajectory for me as well, because it was very also unknown. And I think I went to Wagga knowing that I didn't really want to be a pharmacist. I knew that I didn't want to be a pharmacist because it wasn't enough for me. I always wanted to save the world. And I told my friends, I'm going to go to Africa and like, you know, do all this charity work. And my friends were like, how are you going to pay the bills? And I'm like, I don't know. I'll figure it out. I'm not sure. But I allowed myself after university to explore the world. And so right after university, when most normal people would come back and, you know, get a full-time job, etc. After my internship, I just did locum work and I traveled a lot.
Nice. So
I backpacked Asia for a little bit. I did some volunteer work in China and taught English for a little bit. I backpacked America as well. And I did a lot of stuff solo. And I really recommend doing a lot of stuff solo, because particularly in your 20s, because it allows you to sit in your own thoughts. And being vulnerable with yourself in your 20s is so powerful for later on, because then you're guided by yourself and not by anyone else. And so I did that a lot, and I allowed myself to make mistakes, and I wasn't afraid of that. So I think that was one thing that really allowed me to explore. And so I traveled a lot. I came back and I thought I wanted to be a lawyer and like do sort of like non-profit stuff and change the world that way. And then I realized I'm really bad at detail. So I quit after about 2 months or so of realizing that I got to read too much information. And then after that, I went back into pharmacy, but tried all the different types of pharmacy. I'm like, look, I've got a degree. I technically am a pharmacist. How about I just try different facets of pharmacy and see what works for me? So I did community, which is just regular pharmacy. And what I liked about that is the people element. I loved talking to people and hearing their stories. I loved patients, and I loved understanding their journeys. At one point in one of my community pharmacies, I brought my camera along to work, and I would like take pictures of patients, and like I would ask them to tell me their stories, and then I'll capture it all in my little print book.
Cute.
It's like Humans of New York.
Yeah, I wanted to do that. So I did that for a little while, and I loved hearing like elderly people's stories because they've got so much wisdom. So I did that, but then after a while, it didn't challenge me enough intellectually. But I also had that creative arm of me, my brain going as well. So I moved to hospital where I did kind of community IVF and also some clinical work. And that was good, but I quickly realized that was too technical for me. It was very detail oriented. You have to make sure that you make no mistakes. And I'm like queen of mistakes, you know. But what I realized was I was really good at sales. So there was like two kind of roles. Like there's a role where it's quite technical where you'd have to like do all the admin kind of things as a pharmacist. Right. But there's also a role where you talk to patients and you kind of walk them through things. And I realized I was really good at sales. Like I loved it because it was easy. It's just like talking to people, right? And so I'm like, okay, well, I think I know where I kind of want to go from my career perspective. I'm like, maybe I'll get into pharmaceuticals. And so I wanted to do pharmaceuticals, but particularly in alternative health. And so I thought about opening up a pharmacy that focused on more alternative medicine, but I wasn't ready. I was a little bit too young in my career. I wanted flexibility. I wanted to travel. I wasn't ready to commit. A business is commitment, right?
Right.
And my stint in everything in life is 2 years. So I decided not to do a business, and I decided that I wanted to do sales in pharmaceuticals. And so I decided to try and apply for a job. Now, at that time, I also met a boy for the first time. And so I didn't have my first boyfriend until 27. So I spent most of my 20s exploring myself. And the boy was also accidental. It was swiped not by me, swiped by someone else.
He's not in this room, but anyway. Do you know about this?
He knows. So essentially I was living in Brunswick, like a hipster suburb in Melbourne at the time with my best friend Anna. We had this awesome hipster life and we'd go out to bars and stuff. And then we'd just play on Tinder for fun, like back in the day. And then so one time I was going for a shower and Anna was on my Tinder and she swiped Hanson. And I came back and I'm like, Anna, why'd you swipe this nerdy Asian guy? Like, I'm not into that.
Because he's not in the room. Yeah, keep going.
And she's like, oh, but I know Hanson, like he's, you know, I know him from Brisbane. He's a really nice guy. I'm like, I'm not after a nice guy right now. I'm not after that. I want to be like pushed and I want to be like challenged, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so long story short, we ended up doing long distance for a year because he's from Brisbane, I'm from Melbourne. And so I moved to Brisbane for a boy.
Wow.
I quit my job. And this is how crazy I am. I literally quit my job and then I told him.
Oh, you didn't know?
He didn't know.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So I quit my job, told my boss, sorry, I'm leaving. And then I called him like, hey, babe, I quit my job, so I'm going to move to Brisbane. He's like, what? We haven't talked about this. I haven't planned this. And he's a planner, right? I'm not a planner. I'm like a, whatever I feel, let's just do it kind of girl. I don't care about the consequences. I'll just build it along the way.
How far along were you guys at this point?
We're a year and a half, almost 2 years.
Oh, so pretty... Somewhat far in.
Yeah, he's slow. He's too slow. So I had to make decisions for us, you know?
Hanson's behind the camera like giving side eye right now.
Because if I had waited for him, he would make a pro and con list. And I don't have time for that shit. Let's just do it. So
SWOT analysis.
If he had a chance, he would do it. And so, I literally the next few weeks, I got onto a flight, moved to Brisbane. And so he's like stressing out because I've got to find an apartment, got to be with this girl kind of thing. And so I essentially forced us to start our life together in Brisbane, but I had no job. But I had that idea of joining a pharmaceutical company in sales, right? And so I applied and then I got a job and I landed one of the first cannabis sales roles in Australia. And it was, I think, 2017 or early 2018. And that's what happened. And that's how I got into the cannabis industry and that's how I fell in love.
Whoa.
Those so 2 big chapters.
The 2 loves of your life, right?
Yeah, literally.
Okay, so let's keep going from there. So you then obviously worked for this pharmaceutical company. Then how did that connect with then you starting up your first business?
Yeah. So the very first company that I worked for was called MedLab. It's a small kind of boutique medicinal cannabis company that specialized in chronic pain treatments for patients. And so my job was to teach doctors and nurses and pharmacists how to access, be involved in some of the clinical work that they did and get it off the ground. But this was very early days. The Australian government just legalised it for medicinal purposes.
What year was this?
2018.
Okay, yep.
And so because it was very early days, the government legalised it, but they had no idea what that meant. And so this is where some of my learning began, because I joined this company and they had no idea what the strategy was, what was they need to do, that and that kind of thing. They knew that they had products, they knew that was going to be for, cancer patients, but in terms of like strategy and how to get off the ground, they had no idea. But I love that. I love that there was an unknown, and I thrive in the unknown because I love like just figuring things out.
Right.
Yeah. I hate structure. It makes me feel stuffy, and I feel trapped.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I joined this company and I worked with them for about 2 years and did the sales and things for them, and I loved it. But after about a year and a half, 2 years, I got bored and I wanted to do more and I wanted to learn more. And I'm a constant growth seeker. I love just being able to keep going and like being better. And so I moved to a global company called Canopy Growth. They're at the time one of the largest cannabis companies that was available in the market. Right. When I joined MedLab, there was only like 2 or 3 brands in market. By the time I joined Canopy, I would say there was about 10 brands in market.
So quite quick.
Yeah, quite quick. And so I helped Canopy launch their products into APAC, which is really cool. I was one of the first MSLs or essentially sales reps that was around at the time for that company. And that was amazing. And I loved Canopy because they were global. They had so many resources and such great strategy from like top down and also from bottom up as well, which I really respected. And I learned a lot about how to run businesses, how to run teams, how to inspire people, how to run ethical businesses. And so I was also very lucky because I was mentored by some really great leaders at Canopy as well. And they really they really valued people, which is something that I've taken on and I've implemented in my own business. And so because I was one of the first MSLs, they saw opportunities to bring me to Canada and teach me things.
So they flew you out?
Yeah, they flew me to Canada, not once, but twice. Yep. Maybe 3 times. And like I remember that time, it was the managing director at the time. He forfeited his spot for me.
Wow.
Yeah. There was only 2 spots because it was a global business conference for the whole company. And so essentially there was 2 country managers for every single country across the world. And there was only 2 spots for Australia. And so he gave me his spot because he's like, there's more value in you going and you learning as much as you can so that you can help us. And so I have so much respect for him for doing that for me, because if not for that, I don't think I would be here today. And then he flew me up again. And the second time I went to dispensaries. And the second one was more educational. And so we flew in all these amazing top-tiered cannabis experts from all around the world.
Right.
Into one room, and then we did a whole 1-week education. And part of that was also to go to dispensaries and check out the models and stuff there. And I went to dispensaries in Canada, and I thought, what the hell are we doing in Australia? Because it was like an Apple store. Like you go in and it's sleek. Like it's schmick, everything has a system, everything is so organized, it's so systematic, and it's so accessible. Like you have flowers on display, you have terpenes on the walls, you have a bud tender, you have like awesome music playing. I remember one time I remember seeing also people coming in just like hanging out in groups of friends, like, or people coming in on dates, or people just like...
Really?
Yeah, like there was a guy and a girl who came in, they were clearly on a first date because it's a little bit, I saw the tension. Yep. But they had like little booths so you can sit down, And then like a waiter would come, a waiter, a bartender would come. It was
an experience.
It was an experience, yeah. And I really took that away with me. And I thought, wow, this is really cool. Imagine if we had this in Australia. And it didn't really click right then, but it was the seed, I think, that I needed. And so I came back to Australia, and I remember feeling really frustrated because I came back and I resumed my my role with educating pharmacists and doctors. And I remember going to a couple of different pharmacies, and this is 2019 at the time, or early 2019. And pharmacies back then were so busy with medication checks and blood pressure checks and dispensing medications and just regular pharmacy things. And for me to come in and ask them if I can teach them about cannabis, they're like, oh God, it's the last thing they want to learn about, right? And so they'll shove me into a little tea room in the back, and they'll just have one pharmacist come through at a time whenever they're not busy.
Right.
But I can see the stress in their eyes whenever they are with me.
So they weren't present.
They weren't present. They were thinking about the queue outside because they've got patients waiting for them. And me talking to them for half an hour about the endocannabinoid system, it ain't sinking in. and I could see it, right? And so I knew that the system was not working from my pharmacy perspective. Right. And the patient journey back then was very clunky. It's a bit more streamlined now, I think. Like the industry has really boomed in the last 2 years. But back then it was so clunky, and like it really broke my heart that patients were having such a bad end experience. Like the start experience from patient to doctor was okay, like it was getting a little better. But the end experience where they go to the pharmacist to get the prescription, it was so clunky. And I was like, what is going on? And so part of me was, I remember speaking to my husband and a few other like friends as well about this and being really, really frustrated. And so I thought I could probably do this. I could open something, but I wasn't sure what I wanted to do at that time. And then it was the pandemic. And then what happened was I realized I think that I need to do this.
This episode is produced and brought to you by Social Wave. Social Wave is a strategic content marketing agency helping businesses grow revenue using video, podcasts, and SEO. Head on over to socialwave.com.au to find out more. Now back to the show.
And then I needed to open up a dispensary, and then I kind of visualized what I wanted to do. I wanted to open something that was very experience-based. I wanted to elicit an emotion. I wanted to remove stigma, and I wanted to specialize just in cannabis. And it was one of those things where I thought, oh, do I do other medications as well? Is it risky? Is it, risky having just one thing? Like any other business person would be like, you have to diversify, right? Whereas I was like, you know what, let's niche down. Let's make it all about cannabis and all about plant-based medications. And so that was kind of the vision. And I knew I wanted green walls. I knew I wanted all these things, but I needed to make it happen. And so what I did was, this was probably 2020 at the time, I started doing a business plan. So I downloaded on ANZ how to make a business plan template. And I filled it in, and I'm like, okay, maybe I'll get a loan from the bank and I'll try and do this. So I submitted it to the bank. I had a broker, and the bank said no. And then in March 2020, pandemic hit. Right. And the banks definitely said no because they're like, we're really distracted now. Plus you have no experience. And also cannabis, so much taboo, like it's very like, they call it a risky sector. Right. And even now they still call it a risky sector because they don't know what to do with it, because it's like they put it into the narcotic kind of section.
They don't understand it.
They don't get it, And so I was like, okay. But I didn't take no for an answer. I was like, okay, well, I don't have enough money. So what am I going to do? And so what I did was I sold my apartment. I had this apartment that I bought off the plan. I'm like, you know what? I don't really need this. Let's sell it. So I sold my apartment, and then it still wasn't enough because like we sold it like literally the Saturday before the first lockdowns in Melbourne ever. And
great foresight.
And then I was like, oh shit. And so it still wasn't enough money. So I was like, oh, what do I do? So I put all my savings in. Hanson sold some of his stuff, my husband. And and then I needed more cash. And so it just so happened that because of that time during the pandemic, there was a lack of cloth face masks. And so I drove to my parents' sweatshop in Melbourne and I drew them a little picture of a mask and I said, Mum, do you reckon you can sew this mask for me? And then she's like, I haven't sewed in 10 years because I started importing a few years ago. And she's like, I was like, but you have 10 sewing machines in the back. And she's like, yeah, but I haven't sewn in 10 years. I'm like, just sew me 10. And if I can sell them all, then maybe I'll do something out of this, right? And so she sewed them and I sold them overnight. And then essentially over a span of about, I'd say 3 or 4 months, I sold about $80,000 worth of face masks.
And this was used to fund the...
I added that to my capital to fund Astrid. And without that, I don't think that I could have launched during the pandemic.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So did you still have to take out a loan?
The banks wouldn't give me a loan.
They wouldn't give you a loan, right?
No.
So you self-funded the whole...
Yeah, I bootstrapped the whole thing.
Wow.
And it was touch and go, let me tell you. And so there were points where even with the face mask, I remember it was so risky because it was during the pandemic time where you had to have a permit to drive beyond 5 kilometers in Melbourne.
Oh, it was a radius, yeah. Yep.
Oh, but I broke those rules. And so would secretly drive down Monastery Way at night to my parents' factory. Right. And then I remember my parents would close all the lights at the front so that people
no one could tell.
No one could tell.
Right.
But on the back is a party. We had KFC. And then we had a whole thing going. My grandma was involved too. So my mum would be sewing. My grandma would be cutting the threads. And then my brother would be getting all the orders ready.
And then jamming his finger in as well.
My poor brother. And my dad would be cutting on the material. So it was full flashback to the 90s kind of thing. But it was, in hindsight, really nice to have all that during the pandemic together. I remember I think the first 2 weeks I drove in and my mum had another Asian lady there. And I was like, Mum, you can't have non-family members here. We're already this is very risky business, And she's like, oh, I just can't sew fast enough and I haven't peed all day and my back is hurting. And I'm like, I don't care. Who is this lady? So she had gone to Springvale and told this lady, do you want to come and work for us?
Work for our illegal mask making business.
And I was like, how much are we paying her? Where does she live? Can we trust this lady? My mum's like, yeah, she's Vietnamese, don't worry, she's fine. And I was like, oh my God, fine. I was like, no more people. And then 2 days later, I came in and because I'd have to do my normal 9 to 5 job and then I'll drive in after hours and then we'll pack masks all night and then we'll go back to work the next day, right? Jesus. And so at that time I came in and I saw another person. And I was like...
An extra one on top of that?
An extra one.
Yeah, okay.
And I was like, Mum, I told you, no more people. Who's this extra person? She's like, oh, it's that lady's daughter.
Oh, my God.
I'm like...
full family.
I was like, why are you bringing this other person's daughter? And she's like, oh, you're at work all day. No one's here to pack the orders. We're so behind, blah, blah, blah. I'm getting really stressed, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, my God. So that girl... her name is Judy, and she was my first hire for Astrid.
Oh, that's nice.
So after 4 months, the mask started dwindling down, and I said to Judy, she was so fast at packing masks. I said to Judy, I was like, what are you doing with your life after this? She's like, what do you mean? I was like, I'm building a dispensary. I don't really have a site. I haven't signed anything yet, but do you want to join me? She's like, yeah, okay.
Wow.
So she was my first hire, and I knew that she was special because she had that fire in her eyes. The first 3 weeks that she was with me during the face mask time, said nothing. I thought she was mute. She was literally just packing masks so fast. She was so efficient. Just so hardworking. She had that drive in her, and I could tell early on, I could tell when there's someone special, and I knew that no matter what, I had to hire her. So I hired her, and she's still with me till this day.
Wow.
She's incredible. And then my brother was my second hire, and he's still with us as well, and he does all of our kind of inventory and stuff. But yeah,
so it's a family business in a lot of ways, right?
At one point during 2021, we launched in January 2021, and during that time, a lot of people lost their jobs, and so at one point we had Andrew, my brother, we had Judy, we had Jenny, my sister. We had Anna, my best friend, the one that introduced me to dance. Because Anna's a fashion designer and she had lost her job as well. So I'm like, you know what? Come help us pack some orders. And then Anna's boyfriend, Joel, as well. So it was really special that time because we all came together and like we had something to bond over during a really kind of like dark time in the world.
I was just going to ask, did you start online or was it straight off a physical store?
So we started, in my initial vision, it was always brick and mortar. So we started with brick and mortar and I wanted to focus on the customer journey. And any one of my team members will tell you that I'm obsessed with the customer journey. I'm obsessed with the patient journey. Like I obsess over the little details. And so when we first launched in Jan 2021, we opened our doors to an empty Chapel Street. And Chapel Street's one of the busiest streets in Melbourne, right? And right now, if you go there, it's bustling. But the day that we opened, it was dead lockdowns. There was no one. Every single shop was closed. And so we opened our doors, but no one came in. We had no customers. And so I remember opening my doors. I had Judy already on the books, and my brother was kind of doing part-time, and I came home and I cried because I made no money first day. I thought that I'd just open this awesome dispensary and then people would just come in. But it didn't happen.
Right.
And it didn't happen for weeks because no one knew me, no one knew my brand, no one knew what I was trying to do. I didn't really have a presence yet because everyone's distracted with the pandemic. And so that was tough. That was really, really tough. And I didn't have the ability to pay my brother properly for a few weeks. My husband Hanson did all our bookkeeping and stuff whilst also maintaining his main job.
Right.
Also did not pay him for a couple of years. But I'm really grateful for the people that stuck by me in the early days because it really showed me, that they believed in what I was trying to do. Even if at that time I had a lot of self-doubt because, without the revenue to back it up, then you feel like maybe it's not a good idea, right?
Yeah.
But at every, I guess, every challenge comes with a silver lining, and that is you got to find a way to make it happen. You're like, I cried for a little bit. I'm like, you know what? Stop crying. You got to make it happen. So I came home to my husband Hanson and I said, is it okay if we give up? And he said, no. He said, there is only one way through this and it's for you to get up, head high and get through it. That's the only way. And so I did.
And how did you do it? Like what was the turning points and what were the things that you did to grow the business?
Yep. So we did things old school. So I encouraged my team to make mistakes. One of the things I always tell my team is you got to fail forward. Don't be afraid of failing, but so long as we're learning from our mistakes, then that's all I ask. So in the early days, Judy and I, we had this whiteboard, and this whiteboard was for wins because I always encourage my team, you got to celebrate those wins. Small or big, you got to celebrate them. And then problems, because I also tell my team, you got to embrace those problems. You can't be afraid of them. Don't run away from them. You got to face them head on because you can face them head on, you can solve everything else. And so we had this whiteboard, we split it in the middle. One side was for our wins and one side was our problems. And so we'll list them out and we'll do it every day. Every day we'll assess, okay, what are our wins today? Let's celebrate that. And then what are our problems? Let's try and fix that today. If we can fix it today, then it'll be solved for tomorrow. And I remember I still have pictures of every single whiteboard for about the first couple of months on our wins and problems. And it was amazing because it really gave the team was Judy and Andrew, ownership on how to solve for problems. And it also shifted the mentality as well. I remember one time I asked Judy, I'm like, Judy, we need to get this product in because this patient really wants this product and we need to win every single customer. We need to blow every single patient away and show them that we're the most exceptional dispensary, the best experience they've ever had. And she's like, but I can't get it in because the supplier said it's out of stock. I said, there's a way, find a way. So I DM'd the CEO on LinkedIn and she's like, oh, so that's how it's done. I'm like, yes, you find a way to make it happen. So I think since then she's learnt a lot, because now she never takes no for an answer.
There's always a workaround.
She always finds a way now. Yeah. And it's great because now the team come to me with solutions and not problems, which is an amazing thing.
So inspirational. Far out. I need some of this stuff. I was thinking about it. I was like, yep, whiteboard wins. Like, thinking about it, because obviously every business has its own unique challenges, but there's certainly a way that you can always tackle it in the same way between businesses as well, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And one thing that sort of, as you were telling this story, and I'd love to go back to it and then we can come back to the business side of things, was you were talking about your relationship with your mum through this whole thing, and how did you talk let's just call it the great forgiveness. Like, how did you and your mum work it out through this whole process?
I think that my mum and I have always had a kind of like, I'd say an aggressive relationship, where external people would come who view our relationship from the outside and they're like, oh, you should be nicer to your mum, or you should be less aggressive. But in many ways, it's just our way of communicating with each other. And I think my mum and I, we show love in different ways. And so I think that for me, it was about showing my mum and making time for my mum to show her that I do love her. And then also for myself to mentally forgive her and actually say, I don't blame her for all these things. All those things that she put me through, I don't really blame for her that anymore. I think that she was doing what she had to do to survive, and it's about being able to respect each other as well. And so I think being able to do that and being able to really set aside some mental space before I had the business, and when I was still on my self-discovery phase in my 20s, allowed me to really understand, okay, well, I don't live for my parents. I think a lot of the issues is, and I have a lot of friends who are kind of like in their 30s now, who never spent the time in their 20s to find themselves. They spent a lot of the times in their 20s trying to please someone else, trying to live for their parents, trying to appease to their parents' needs, because that's what will make their parents proud, right? Whereas I did the opposite. In my 20s, I did everything to make my mum angry, but not on purpose to make her angry. I lived for myself. And so I think it seemed selfish, but I'm glad I did it at that time, because it meant that I allowed myself time to find myself, find my own strength, and then find enough strength in my late 20s and early 30s to say, hey, you know what, Mum, I get it. I get why you did all that. I forgive you. It's okay. Whereas my friends now who, even in like finding relationships, or even in work, for example, they're in jobs they hate, but they did it because their parents made them do it. Or they're in relationships they hate, but because it's the type of person that they think they should be with, but not necessarily is the right person for them, but they stay in those relationships. It becomes toxic. But why? You have to know yourself and you have to own yourself. You have to have enough confidence to really understand who you are, what drives you, and what are your values, and be able to take away from that and move forward.
Yeah. Well, because I sort of use the term, like, a lot of people sleepwalk their way through life.
Yeah.
Particularly in their 20s, right? Because
they
don't actually genuinely like open up their eyes, and they don't actually spend any time to, as you said, like, find yourself. And, you were also talking about how, you traveled a lot, and I felt like I did that a lot during uni. I took like a 3-year degree. Took me like 5 years to finish because I was like deferring, and I was doing part-time because I was like juggling a job so that could fund my travel habits. And then the travel itself, much like you, I found really, number one, liberating, but number two, I found it super interesting that it gave me a lot of perspective. And I would even argue a lot of the time, and I don't know, I'd be curious to get your thoughts. Like, I actually think there should be like a compulsory gap year after you finish uni to go traveling, because I think a lot of people just roll into the next thing, as you said, and that's like a massive problem that I see with my friends as well.
Exactly. And I think traveling in your 20s is so different to like traveling in your 30s or your 40s or your 50s, because you have this kind of like sense of adventure and you're not afraid. Like, I was so fearless in my 20s. Like, now, we just came back from Thailand a few days ago, and I was like, man, I was such a pussy. Like, can't do the shit I used to do. But I think that, yes, I agree. I think there's two things that people need in their 20s. Number one is to move out of home straight after uni. Number two is travel a lot in your 20s, and don't be stuck in your degree. Like, how can you know that you need to be at a doctor or a pharmacist as soon as you graduate. You don't know yourself. You're so young. You need to experience life. And if we can make those decisions for our, I guess, younger generations now, it will help us mold better future generations.
I think it's such an interesting take though at the moment, because I know everyone talks about a lot of travel and whatnot, but I also think there's this weird period of time with the pandemic. A lot of people in their 20s at the moment had to just kind of put their life on pause for 3 years, and the only choice that they had was go into academics or find something else.
Yeah.
You were kind of stuck in one place.
Yeah. I think I see that because I have a lot of, young Gen Zs who work at Astrid.
Right.
And I really want to empower younger people because I see that they're going through something different that, we didn't go through. And I think every generation has their thing, right? Every single generation has their thing that they have to overcome, and this is their thing. But whether it's our generation or their generation, it's up to them to overcome it. It's up to them to have the will to be like, you know what, this is not okay. I'm going to go and fix it. I'll make myself better, right? I think that what I see with the younger generation, because they didn't have the chance to kind of like live, kind of like we did, they lack a lot of life skills. And one of those skills is communication. It's so digital. Everything is texting or TikToks or instant messages, and face-to-face communication, eye-to-eye, is like so scary for them. And it's one of those skills though that's so essential in life. You have to be able to communicate effectively. And I think whether it's in business or in life or in relationships, communication is the one thing that is translated across all three.
I totally agree. Like even seeing you tell your story, like my God, like just like you know how to sort of even storytell, I think, in a lot of ways. And I think part of that, at least my observation, is spending a lot of time with different people in different walks. Like you just exposed yourself, right? And I find that really inspirational, because I think you strike me as someone who's just highly, highly curious. But I think a lot of people have their curiosity killed because of pleasing parents, because of societal pressures, because of friends and whatever else is out there. How do you, because you're someone who just goes, right, I know I should do this, or this is a way to please someone, but I choose not to. So where do you muster up either the courage or the ability to go, yep, I know this might ruffle a few feathers, but I'm going to do it anyway?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think for me, I just don't care what people think. You just have to not care. I think the thing that people think is that everyone's watching them. No one cares what you do.
That's true.
Like I post things on Instagram. I don't even check who comments. I don't really care. I do it for me. You got to live for yourself. You got to live not to please other people. You got to live to make yourself happy. And then from there, you will find internal happiness. But if you keep doing things to gain approval, please other people, impress a guy, impress your parents, not disappoint your parents, you're never going to be happy. You're always going to be living for someone else.
And it takes a bit of self-awareness for you to be able to actually achieve that, and self-confidence, because otherwise you aren't aware you're in a situation like that, or even you think that people are watching you, but again, they only remember you for maybe 30 to 40 seconds.
Exactly,
and then they move on with their day.
And I think it also goes back to being okay with failing. And I think it goes back to my childhood, where I was always second best.
Yeah, right.
I was never like number one, right? I'm always trying. I'm always trying to, be better. And I was always used to failing.
So you just desensitized to it.
Yeah. I've always been like, okay, well, it didn't work. Let's try something else.
Yeah, like what's the worst that can happen?
Exactly. Whereas a lot of people who are like always number one, it's hard for them to fail. They don't want to fail.
Actually, I can relate to that, because in primary, I don't think I've told this story before, but my mum used to tell me, primary school was like, this was like in Villawood, this is out Western Sydney. The school was like full of sort of not just migrant kids, but local kids as well. Not the most academically astute. So it was quite easy for me, from a family who really focused on education as well, to do really well. I actually got ducks for primary school, right? And it was this funny transition to high school, where then I went into also selective school here in Sefton, which, a lot of bright people, a lot of studious people. And I remember during during primary school, I used to get told, whether it's by teachers, whether it's by my mum, it's like, you're really smart, you're really intelligent. And I tethered my identity to being that, so that when I got to high school, and then all of a sudden you go from you're being at the front of the pack to now either the middle or even the back of the pack, you have this like real issue around it. And I remember grappling with it in the first couple of years, and then all of a sudden going, shit, like
who am I? And
when you're like 13, you're like, my life's fucking over. And it was really tough. It was really tough for me to eventually do it. But then similarly to yourself, like over time, I was just like, you know what, like it doesn't really matter. Like I got a supportive household. Mum and dad still support me and things like that. But a lot of people have this issue. A lot of people all of a sudden go, right, if I'm not that person that everyone expects me to be, they've got real issues. And then there's that internal turmoil and conflict, and maybe even like resentment, I think, to a certain degree as well.
Yep. And it all comes out in your late 30s, your early 40s, because you don't really address it, because life pushes us to, you know, work really hard in our 20s and our 30s, and then suddenly you have to get married, you have to have kids, and then by the time in your late 30s, early 40s, you're like, where the hell did my life go? And I've always been one of those people who that like one of the mantras I stick by is like regret. Like I don't want to think about what if. Like I hate what if. I will just do it, and then if it's a bad thing, then I deal with the consequences. But I hate regret. And so an example of this is we had our Byron Bay launch for Astrid recently. And we had this really intimate launch. It was really beautiful, and one of those things I'm really, really proud of. And I really wanted Chris Hemsworth to come. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to DM him. So I DM'd him, right? And he never replied. But the thing is, if I didn't DM him, then I'll regret it. I'm like, well, what if? I won't know. And then recently there was another really exciting thing that happened the last couple of weeks. And I read an article in the High Times, which is like a marijuana magazine, and there was like this really, really awesome girl in it who was Asian American, and she worked for this really, really cool brand. And I was like, this is so amazing. I can really relate to her. She's Asian and she's in cannabis and she's like killing it. Like she's so cool, and she talks about a lot of things that I could really resonate with. And so I DM'd her, thinking that, oh my God, this chick's so cool, she's never going to reply to me. But she replied to me. And if I had the mentality where, oh, you know, they're never going to reply to me.
You say no to yourself first, right?
Exactly. Whereas I don't care. I just DM them because I don't want to regret anything in life, and life is too short, and I want to love every single year of my life. And I can honestly say with hand on heart, I lived my 20s. I loved my 20s, and I have no regrets.
That's obviously carried a really positive effect across your life and also to other people. I want to take it back a little bit as well. You spoke about being influenced in a previous workplace with a really strong workplace culture, and now you are implementing that within your workplace culture.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about why it's so important to you and what it kind of cultivates within the team as well?
Yeah. Oh, this is something I'm really passionate about. Team culture is everything for me, and there's a couple of reasons. And I think even as a leader, it took me a while to really understand what it is that I wanted to build with Astrid, right? I wanted to be in a really awesome dispensary and a really amazing dispensary and an influential dispensary, and I think that that's something that we are achieving, and we are hitting those goals. But for me, it goes beyond that. I think that patient access and making cannabis normal, that's amazing. But I really love inspiring and building the people that we have within Astrid to be amazing leaders. I want to build these people so that they in future can become amazing human beings, and they can build awesome things with their life. Because I think ultimately in this world, I think that there's no opportunity for people to build each other because they're rushing through life, right? And so within this ecosystem, I want to be able to have my team members come to me when they have problems. I want to make sure that I don't grow so fast that they can't speak to me, you know? So recently we've made a decision that we're not going to grow at all costs anymore. We're going to grow the way that we want to grow. And the great thing about bootstrapping is that you have to answer to nobody. So I call the shots, right? And so I decided that I'm putting my people first, because if I can look after my people and grow them to be amazing leaders, they will look after my patients, and that would really help change this world. But if I don't do that, then what's the point of doing anything at all?
Right.
So I'm really passionate about that, and part of that is to spend time understanding everyone's strengths and weaknesses, understanding how they work, what ticks, what drives them, and making a really safe space for them to want to explore and learn and grow as well. And that's been one of the highlights of my career. I think seeing people evolve from, you know, young, less experienced to confident and, you know, strong human beings is really amazing.
Yeah, and I can resonate with that. Like I sort of like to sort of like almost, you know, instead of saying like team members, it's like family members as well in a lot of ways, right? At least internally, because like it was funny, Davey and I had a very candid chat yesterday. I was sitting in his office and we were just talking, and you know, he used the same term. He's like, his company of people was just his family as well, as much as it is ours, right?
I totally feel that.
Because we need to have that level of, I guess, transparency in that culture and that welcoming environment, that safety, because otherwise people then go out and they make decisions for themselves, and sometimes that can either go against it. And I think as a company or as a business, you try and do this because, number one, I think having strong retention also leads to better business performance. Let's be frank about it from a selfish standpoint. But we're dealing with people, you know, and people are really key to every business, in my opinion.
Exactly, yeah. And I think about, like, you know, when I was younger, I wish that I had an environment that constantly pushed me to grow. And so I'm lucky in that I'm very self-curious. And so I push myself to grow a lot, and I surrounded myself with the right people, right? But a lot of people don't do that. And so within Astrid, I try to promote curiosity. I try to promote, you know, well, how else can we communicate with each other to be more effective? Well, what else can we do to be more collaborative? Do you know your strengths and weaknesses? How are you making this person feel when you say things like that? What else can we do to drive the business forward? But what else can we do to improve patient outcomes? Like, these are a lot of big questions that I get people involved in, because it's not just me answering them, it's everyone.
And what's, I guess, on the horizon? You mentioned Byron, then you got Melbourne. What's the plan for you? Obviously, you want to do it sustainably, but what's in the pipeline?
So I believe that we're building a brand and a legacy. And so I want to build it sustainably. I think that we are community first. We're very grassroots. We do a lot of patient advocacy as well, which means that we work with, you know, our patients, understand their problems, and we see if we can escalate that either from a policy perspective or from a government perspective to see if we can help them. There's a lot of things that are still big problems within the medical cannabis space for patients, and a lot of discrimination, and so we do a lot of that stuff to help them. So I think that's a big thing for me, beyond the brick and mortar space, I think, as well. But eventually I'd like to have a Sydney dispensary and a Brisbane dispensary, and eventually might, you know, have my own kind of like over-the-counter skincare products, maybe not cannabis products per se, but different kind of like natural ingredients. And I think that'd be really cool. I have eczema, so I'm really passionate about like skincare. Like, I suffered with eczema my whole life, so I love skincare. And I've got a really big collaboration coming out with a big supplier chain. I can't really say names right now, but within the kind of like skincare space that I'm like, it's just a dream come true, essentially. And then I pinch myself every day for being so, I feel like I'm very lucky. And I think as an Asian person running a business as well, I think I struggle to praise myself. I think I always talk myself down. I had dinner with a group of friends a few months ago, and I was sitting across from a guy who also runs his own business, and he was saying, Lisa, you know, I noticed that whenever we're in these group situations, you always downplay your success. And then I thought, oh yeah, I do. And he's like, why do you do that? And I think that I do that because I don't want to make others feel small, so that I make myself feel small so that they will feel comfortable. Right. Because as Asians, you're taught to not be, you know, a show off or like too big or grandiose kind of thing. So yeah, that's something that I'm still working on. It's my weakness. I recognize that, so I'm trying to work on that. But yeah.
Like, I can see, I mean, I guess to wrap it up, like, I can definitely see how much you're just enjoying everything that's coming your way as well. I feel like, you know, I mean, we haven't that many chats, but I would love to have more. But I feel really like I've used it a few times already, like very inspired, not because of like what you've achieved, but actually the way you've gone about it as well.
Aww,
like there's so much, like I feel like there's so much grace, but then I think that at the same time, there's just a lot of like gratitude and taking it one step at a time. I think we get very much so stuck in like the grand plans and what things are going to be like, and you're still very present, which probably is very formative when you were in uni in Wagga and you're sort of like taking that through to like life in general, which I find, just really inspiring to see. And I feel like I've also got a lot to learn from someone like yourself about all this sort of stuff as well, being another business owner with my shortcomings. But I appreciate you coming on the show. If people want to get in contact with you, if they want to shoot their shot like you and not regret it, then how do they do it?
So DM me. So as in like how to DM me?
Where do they find you?
Where they can get in contact?
I can do the business stuff, but I can't do this. DM me at Lisa the Holistic Pharmacist on Instagram, or if you want to check out our business, it's Astrid.Dispensary on Instagram.
Excellent.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
No worries. Thanks guys.
Thanks for listening to the Level Asian podcast. Make sure you subscribe and leave us a 5-star review if you enjoyed the episode. And why not share it with friends and family who might enjoy it too? Also, make sure you head over to levelasianpodcast.com to join our email list and to receive the latest updates and get notified when the next episode drops. If you know a great guest we should feature, email us at contact@levelasianpodcast.com or DM us on our socials in the show notes. Catch you on the next episode.